Good evening and welcome to the Society of Academic Emergency Medicine Resident and Medical Student Webinar, Tips for New Residents, Financial and Emotional Wellness. I'm Dr. Andrew Starnes, third-year resident at Wake Forest and current president of the Resident and Medical Student Board of SAEM. Thank you to those of you joining us for the first time. The core purpose of SAEM RAMS is to advance the future of emergency medicine through the development of resident and medical students into academic leaders. RAM's core organizational values are knowledge creation, translation, and dissemination, professional development, advocacy for education and research, collaboration, diversity, community, and service. Tonight, we're proud to bring you a RAMS webinar that is the first in a series of two designed to help new or young residents in emergency medicine get a good start on finding success in and outside of the hospital. In this episode, we will focus on two of the major areas outside of the hospital that residents don't receive a lot of training on, but are major contributors to their overall well-being. These topics are financial habits and cultivating relationships and resilience. Our speakers will offer valuable insight into what to expect and how to begin planning now to avoid common mistakes made during these critical years. During the presentation, you may submit questions for the presenters by clicking the chat button in your Zoom menu interface. Questions will be answered during our question and answer session to start immediately after our presenters have concluded. To kick things off, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Tonight, we're joined by Dr. Jessi Gold and Dr. Sam Shen. Dr. Gold is the Assistant Professor and Director of Wellness, Engagement, and Outreach, Department of Psychiatry at Washington University in St. Louis. Dr. Gold has been interested in physician mental health and wellness since her master's work in anthropology focused on pre-medical education as a culture. This has only broadened and evolved for her throughout her training and through COVID-19, where healthcare worker mental health became a primary focus. For example, she both expanded her outpatient psychiatry practice to offer more appointments to healthcare workers and their families, and was involved in her hospital's mental health response to COVID-19. Her work also includes media literacy and advocacy. Dr. Gold has written for multiple popular press outlets, including Time, the New York Times, the Washington Post, Self, and is a contributor to Forbes. Through those experiences, she has become interested in the role of the media and social media in mental health and mental health stigma. We are also joined by Dr. Shen. Dr. Shen is the Associate Professor and Vice Chair of Clinical Operations and Quality in the Department of Emergency Medicine at Stanford University. Dr. Shen serves in the role of Patient Safety Officer, Associate Chief Quality Officer. He also directs the Administration Fellowship in the Department of Emergency Medicine. Dr. Shen received his bachelor's from Stanford University and his MD and MBA from UCLA. His emergency medicine residency was completed at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston. Dr. Shen's academic interests include digital health, quality improvement, and patient safety. Welcome to you both, and thank you both so much for joining us tonight. For the audience, our speakers will be answering questions online throughout the presentation. Dr. Shen, I'll turn it over now to you.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Andrew. Again, my name is Sam Shen. I'm very excited to take this opportunity to share some tips and strategies in terms of financial well-being. Obviously, finance is a huge topic, and it's like if someone were to ask you, can you teach me about health? Certainly, there's many components that fall under that umbrella of health or finance. If we were talking about health, we would be talking about, exercise, eat right, get lots of sleep, and maybe take your vitamins. And, and so I want to translate that into essentially the equivalent of the financial health with the limited time that we have, and kind of just focus on certain key principles that I think, I believe will kind of set you up for a good foundation for success. And so again, my goal is to try to highlight 5 principles of financial planning that's applicable to someone at your stage in your training and career, and hopefully simplify the financial steps that you can take and use at the end of the presentation. And so when we think about what concerns physicians, this is a survey from 2014 that I just thought was interesting because again it just highlights based on the age group what people are concerned about in the physician occupation. And specifically under age 40, the concern about will retirement money last? What should I invest in? Money for college? And of course, some other things. And these are real life issues that you have the advantage of having a long time frame to start thinking about. And first, I want to kind of set some common terms. When I refer to finances and investments and things like that, I'm going to be referring to savings, CDs, bonds, stocks, ETFs, mutual funds. And the reason I'm going to refer to those are kind of typically what people have at their disposal to invest in. And they're kind of your liquid forms of resources, as opposed to illiquid, which is real estate and businesses, because those things are very hard to sell and move around. And so I just want to set that context. But the first thing I think it's really important to be able to understand is what are your short-term and long-term financial goals? That is one of the very first things you have to be able to understand, and or at least understand for yourself. And when you think about it, that encompasses several things. You have to think about your time frame. Are you looking at 5 years? Are you looking at 40 years? Because that makes a huge difference. You have to think about your goals of your investment. Are you right now thinking about retirement? Are you thinking about trying to save up for a house? Are you trying to put away money for your kids' college? And then another variable that's important to consider is what's your personal comfort? What is your risk tolerance? I always joke that there are two types of people when they go to casinos or to Vegas. There are those that play the slot machine and those that play the change machine where they never lose. And so again, that actually affects how what your investment strategy is going forward. And so I want to pose this question to everyone. I'll make it a rhetorical question at this point, but any investment that you can think of that will give you a really, really high return, but with very minimal risk. And so I want you to think about that and think about all the options or things that you have seen in your life or heard about. Anything you can think of that will give you that type of dynamic in terms of a really good return, but with very little risk. And so I'll just go ahead and answer. The answer is no. And it certainly won't be in Bitcoins, but the answer is no, because at the end of the day, there's a certain principle when it comes to investing that is just, it's almost like the three laws of thermodynamics or physics, or where this idea of risk reward trade-off. And essentially, if it sounds too good to be true. And what that means is that one of the foundation is that when you look at the different ways that you can invest your money, on one end, you have cash. Cash doesn't lose value other than through inflation, but cash is cash. Then you can put your money in certificate of deposits, bonds, mutual funds, stock, options, and of course, on the other extreme, gambling. But that is the risk spectrum, from the lowest risk, which is cash, to, again, gambling. And what's tied with that is your return. And so the fundamental principle is that when something is very, very safe and has low risk, the return is equivalently very low. But if something has higher risk, then it is associated with a higher return. And so that trade-off has to be something that you take in consideration when you manage your portfolio. So currently, if you put your money in a savings account, which is essentially as safe as you could possibly get, the return is probably about 0.1%, maybe 0.2, somewhere even lower than that. You move to CDs, bonds, mutual funds, you're starting to get into 6 to 7%. You get into stocks. Historically, over the last 10, 15 years, you can return about 8 to 11%. Over a long time frame, it's usually close to 8, 9, 10%. And so, but again, there's a lot more risk. So that is something you definitely have to consider when you think about managing your portfolio, is what type of return or what type of risk you're willing to accept for that type of return. And the reason is because if you had a price of investment, if you want to put your money in some sort of investment and it was so good because it returned so well, everybody's going to buy it then. Everybody will flock to that. And that price will then go up. And then eventually that means that return will go down. So everything will equilibrate. And that's why it is very hard to find some investment that returns a lot that other people haven't noticed and then bought into. The next principle I want to share is the idea of trying to beat the market. And you might have heard about that, where people, when they invest, they want to do better than the market, or they want to have an advisor or a hedge fund manager because they think they can do much, much better than what the market would typically do. And this is a nice, interesting study where it just shows that, when you look at all the different things you can invest in, you can put your money on the very, very left. There's different categories on the bottom. There's energy, healthcare, financial, bonds, commodities. Again, just a whole spectrum of things. If you look at the average investor in terms of what they do, they average about a little bit over 2% return, meaning if you try to invest on your own, pick your own stocks, and manage your own portfolio, you typically return about a little over 2% a year. Now, if you just invested that in an index fund, just a simple, straightforward, it represents the economy or the largest companies, let's say in just the US, essentially you do nothing, the return is closer to 8.5%. All right. And this is just another study showing in a different time period from 1999 to 2018, the concept of, again, you could potentially put your money in different classes. And if you just looked at the average investor compared to the S&P 500, which just happens to be a representation of the economy, again, there are different classes you can look at. Typically, you would have done better if you just left it in a generic index fund and just let that money grow that way, as opposed to trying to beat the market. And next principle I want to highlight is, and this is very pertinent to this audience, is because you're at the early stage and beginning stage of your career, where when you finish your training, your salary is going to go up significantly. And as a result, you will have more resources to invest, and therefore you are in a better position to take advantage of time. So the idea of compounding is so important because it really contributes to much of the return down the road. And so I want to pose a couple scenarios. Let's say you're 25, you put $200 a month away into your retirement plan. And assuming just a very standard 9% return, which is a historical return over a long period of time, but your friend does the same thing at $200 a month, or actually doubles that amount at $400 a month. So they're putting twice as much, but started 20 years later. So what happens at the end? So age 65, both people have invested $96,000, but in the first scenario, you have an $884,000 return versus a $268,000 return. And so it just shows the power of compounding. And again, that's just a pure exponential calculation of math, but it just highlights how important it is to start early, even if it's just a little amount. Now, when we think about the stock market, often when I look at the charts, as an emergency physician, I look at this and I sometimes look at it and says, that looks like it's a rhythm I need to shock. Well, actually, it's just a volatility in the stock market. And so, the stock market is inherently irregular. And if you look at it in, again, a very small time frame, that's just what it looks like. But if you look at it over a long run, that volatility, which does exist, over a long run, you do see a general trend. And even though they always say, don't let history be your guide for the future when it comes to investing, because you can't always use the past to predict. But in general, all this reflects is that as a economy, there's always going to be innovation and growth that drives the overall economy. And essentially, you just want to take advantage of that trend. And so along with that is the idea that you don't want to time the market. I mentioned about how not wanting to beat the market. Well, a corollary to that is not trying to time it. And I see this a lot, especially during certain pivotal events. When COVID hit and the market dropped, back in 2008, when the real estate created a huge crash, a lot of people were thinking, gosh, let me get out of it and I'll wait till it gets better, or I think the market's really high, let me time it. What this study has shown is that if you look at 20-year time period, so a nice long period, if you invested $10,000 in the S&P 500, again, very generic index, if you had stayed fully invested, that $10,000 during that time period, it becomes $43,000, $44,000. However, if you try to time it, you accidentally missed just 5 days, the 5 best days during that 20-year period, the return is down to $30,000. If you happen to miss 10 days, it's even lower. And again, you can go down to the right, saying that it is very difficult to know when those 10 days, 5 days, 20 days are. And so it is just better to just not to try to be too active and try to time it and just to leave it be. And so, given those kind of 5 principles, and again, there's a lot, but I wanted to at least highlight a few that can stage a discussion. or at least present a framework to then think about what to do with your own finances. So what can you do now or when you're about to graduate? You know, I kind of thought about some just very basic steps, and I apologize if for many people this is very, very basic or just seems very elementary, but I do want to just really walk through some concrete things. And so the first and foremost is to, you know, have a mental model about just participating and investing if you can, because you just want to take advantage of the time that you have that, again, you can't get back. You're in a position now that you can't that somebody else later on won't ever have the opportunity. It's important to think of yourself as a business. If you were a business, you would look at your revenue, you would look at your expenses, you would look at your quote unquote profit. And so if you as an individual thought of yourself as a business, you'd want to look at your yearly income, you want to look at your expenses, and you want to calculate then what's left over. And you can be very methodical about this. You can do it on an Excel spreadsheet. You can do it informally, but the point is you want to at least have gone through that exercise so you're not surprised. So when you do that, then what's left over is the resources you have to invest. But in doing so, you also want to look at your debt. Within your expenses, what are your recurring debts? And not only that, what are the debts, the interest rate for those debts? You know, commonly, whether it's student loans, car, credit cards, you want to have an accounting of what those interest rates are. Once you do that, you'll know what money you have left over. You want to then try to max out your 401k. Now, every program is different. You know, some residency programs, they match, some don't. But you want to max out your retirement plan because you know, it reduces your tax burden. And in many cases, if there's a match, it's essentially free money. But it's a way to avoid taxation or mitigate taxation on your income, while again, allowing a vehicle for your money to grow. And I mentioned 401k, there are IRAs, there are Roth IRAs, so there are different kinds. And essentially, the key theme to all of them is that this is a vehicle for you to put money into that can grow tax-free, and so that when you withdraw it at some point in the future, you're not paying taxes on it. And it varies based on, you know, some are offered by your employer, which is like the 401k. Some you can, you know, put on, you can create yourself, like the IRA, as well as the Roth IRA. And again, I don't want to get too much into the details, but just recognize that there are these vehicles at your disposal. And especially when you are a resident, when your income is under 6 figures, you can take advantage of the Roth IRA. Again, should you have the capacity to do so, because I recognize depending on where you do residency, where you live, your situation, you know, you may not have that additional buffer to do that. So I kind of touched on, if you have money left over beyond the 401k, you should consider the Roth IRA. And then if there's still money left over that you want to try to create, start to build a portfolio, you can open up a brokerage account, and all the brokerage accounts right now, there's no minimum, there's all the big ones have no fees. It just takes 5 minutes to open one up. So you have a vehicle to start putting in a little bit of money, whether it's $10, $50, it doesn't matter. And that allows you to then create that emergency fund. That's a safe thing to do. Some people use a rule of thumb of 6 months. And then with some of that, you can start putting into different index funds. And I would say if you're not sure what to do, the default I would recommend is just put it in a straightforward S&P 500 index fund. So again, if you have a little bit left over, you're not sure what to put into, that would be the safest thing to do to start with for money that, again, after you met all those other obligations, that will be sitting there for the next 30, 40 years. And then depending on how active you want to be and how interested you are, on a yearly basis, you would just reevaluate, reassess, and adjust your portfolio. Because again, and you can certainly look online, there are different asset allocation models, say, you know, based on how old you are, what you should be doing. A rough rule of thumb is, you know, you take your age, subtract it from 100, and that's the amount that should be in stocks and equity as opposed to cash and bonds. Because the younger you are, the more you have time to compound and absorb those variations over a long period of time to achieve that higher percent return. And so with that, I will stop and for any question, or actually turn over to Dr. Gold.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shen. I appreciate you sharing the insight with us. Just a reminder for everyone, we will answer questions at the conclusion of both of our speakers' talks. So feel free to start entering those questions while they're on your mind in the chat. We'll now hear from our second speaker, Dr. Gold.
Hi, everybody. I have the distinct pleasure of attempting to talk to you about mental health and residency in like 20 minutes, which is fun and hard. So I'm going to do my very best to, distill that down. That's why I said it's a marathon, not a sprint, because there's a lot of information to try to distill, but hopefully you'll get something out of it that you'll feel like you can take home with you. This is me on match day. So I feel like that's where most of you are, which is you're like, why are you talking to me about mental health right now? I feel really good about having matched. Leave me alone. Or you're like, listen, I don't feel really good about where I matched and I don't want to talk to you either. They sent the psychiatrist to treat me right now at this talk, and that's not fun either. So either way, I'm not here to treat you and I'm not here to tell you you're not allowed to be happy. I'm a big fan of feelings. So, I think that I'm really just here to tell you you're allowed to have whatever feelings you're having. And we all kind of start here, right? Which is you get done with medical school, you're having a lot of emotions, and then you come to start to realize you're like, wait a second. So I actually don't know very much about anything. So where am I going to live? And how am I going to afford it? Which is what we were just listening to. And how am I going to keep up with my friends and family? And will they even understand me? Like what's going on? And how am I going to handle the stress? And I'm trying to move all of these boxes that are all over so I can actually read my slides. When will I sleep? And what is residency like in a pandemic? Because you guys are still in a pandemic. And then but wait, I can't even prescribe Tylenol on my own yet. So you guys are going from, being a med student, or maybe you did one sub-I or 2 sub-Is, or I don't know, maybe not even, because you guys have a weird year where you didn't even really get to travel. And then you're thrown into this thing where someone's like, hey, you're a doctor, go, right? So you go from match day being stoked or I don't know, sad, depending on where you're at, right? And then you kind of hit this anxiety spiral. Also super common, right? I like this cartoon because it's the way everybody is, which is we have a lot of worries and they don't all come true, right? That is just how we are. We think about a lot of things and a lot of the things don't manifest, but it helps us to think about them. Sometimes we think about them because we're just those kind of people. We're type A people where we go down this thing and we're like, well, if I plan about all of these things, that'll help. If I think about every single possible scenario, then I will know everything. It's really hard to do that, right? If the pandemic taught us anything, there's so much uncertainty about literally everything, right? But we still feel like that. So we're going to have a lot of feelings about residency, and there's going to be a lot of stress in a transition. And this is a particularly stressful transition. So I tried to come up with 5 things or 5 tips for maintaining mental wellness in residency. I picked the term wellness because it's not completely just mental health. I believe in using the term mental health when we're actually talking about mental health. I don't like using the term wellness when we're actually talking about things that require treatment. Trying my best to say okay, you transition from being a med student, you have this anxiety spiral, and what do you do about it? The first one is no matter what anybody tries to tell you, you're allowed to have feelings. Residency is hard. There are times when it's hard. There are times when you'll feel happy. There are times when you'll feel sad. There are things that you will do for the first time ever, and they are going to be challenging. And even though people might pretend that they're not, when they were a resident, they were challenging too, right? And so they might forget, but sometimes they need a reminder. sometimes they're just not very nice people, you know, because some of us aren't, right? So no matter what anybody tries to tell you, you're allowed to have feelings, and that's a strength. And it's really important that you take the time to have them. Where you take the time to have them is kind of debatable. So there are times where it's more easy to have feelings than other times. So like maybe it's not that easy to have feelings like in the middle of work all the time, because you guys have really busy shifts, and getting in the middle of the shift and actually breaking down might not be the easiest place to do it. But it's important to like work asking yourself how you're doing into your day. We don't do that because we're like not like thinking about ourselves as people, right? I do the same thing. Like I go about my entire day being like, hey, like, let's just see patients. Like, let's just do my job and care for other people. And I never go like, hey, Jessi, how you doing? Right. So it's important to go like in the morning, ask yourself how you're doing. How are you feeling? And actually answer the question. And before you go to bed, maybe do the same thing and actually like take the time to answer it. And actually you'd say like, don't judge those feelings. Like there's no good or bad feeling. There's no feeling that you need to like get away. Just let that be. This cartoon's here because it's funny. I'm a psychiatrist, I'm a prescriber, right? So people come to me all the time and they're like, get rid of these feelings. I don't want them. But we don't need to do that, right? I think Mr. Rogers is a prophet. This is one of the reasons why, right? There's no should or should not when it comes to having feelings. They're part of who we are, and their origins are beyond our control. When we can believe that, we can find it easier to make constructive choices about what we do with those feelings. So basically he's like, just have them, right? Because if you say like, there's a should, like that I shouldn't be having these feelings, I should be having these feelings, then you're really saying like, you're judging yourself for having them, right? And just leave them out there. When you have feelings like that, it allows you to then figure out what to do with them. And that's point 2, which is figure out what coping skills work for you. So we think a lot about coping skills in this like really abstract way where like somebody gave you free yoga classes and you were like, I guess I'll try yoga. Or like somebody told you mindfulness had evidence, which it does. And you were like, I guess I'm supposed to be really good at mindfulness. But if you don't like mindfulness, that's okay, right? The important thing is that there's something that you like to do that makes you feel good and that you incorporate that into your life, right? There's a Twitter thread that I started the other day, like this week, where I just asked a bunch of doctors, like, what do they do to cope? And there are so many different things that people do. And that's what's important, right? Like people are like, I go in nature. Some people were like, I journal. Some people were like, I just breathe. Some people were like, I go for a run. You know, there are so many different things that people have figured out that they like. What's important is that you write that down somewhere, and that when you're super stressed out, you go to that list and you say, hey, I'm super stressed out. What do I like to do? Because sometimes our brain takes over and we forget even that things work and that we like to do anything. And if we go to that list, we just try something. Sometimes stuff doesn't work in the moment. Sometimes things don't work all the time, but that's okay. Just like go to the list, try something. If that thing doesn't work, try something else. It's okay. Just keep going down the list, right? And that's one of those things I would say is like, figure out some coping skills, put them on the list, especially because like we're talking about relationships, maybe come up with some things that like you and your partner, if that's who you go to residency with, can do together, or you and a friend can do together. And that way you're not like isolated and lonely if that's part of it. Though like some of that also could be a way to get away from people if you've been in a really crowded ER and you're sick of people, in which case journaling is really good for that because you can just be by yourself and you only have to journal 15 minutes like 2 or 3 times a week, and that's what's evidence-based, right? A really good way to kind of get out of your head in that like I'm spiraling, I have a lot of anxiety, which is super physical and I'm breathing a lot, is this like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding technique. I just put it here so you could see it. All it is like when you're feeling super physical symptoms, like your heart's racing and you're not able to be in the moment, you just name, 5 things you can see, 4 things you can feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. If you forget which sense goes with which number, totally doesn't matter. What matters is that you go from like being in your like physical sense or spiraling out in your head like you were when you were thinking about all of those questions that you had before residency, to just being in the moment and thinking about all your senses and sensations, right? Some people, instead of these things, will count categories. So like if you like dogs, you just start naming dogs, puts you in the moment of just dogs, right? Another thing that I would say is know your limits. No is a complete sentence. And when they say that, I completely mean it. You can have boundaries and still be a good person. So we think a lot about like, we're caregivers. We like to help people. You can help people and be a person who says no. I didn't learn that. I'm still learning that, especially as a resident. I often would like, you know, say yes to projects that I thought I was being helpful about, or I thought that I really needed to do, but I never evaluated them within the context of my life and my mental well-being. And I really wish that I did, which would have been like, am I doing this for me, or am I doing this because somebody asked me to do this? And I really think that like, I'm trying to impress that person, right? And sometimes we have to do that. And sometimes we have to do things for our resume and things like that, right? But if you are doing something for your resume, balance that with something you like and something you're doing for you. So like, you know, pay attention to that. So it's give and take, and not just a lot of take, and say no where you can. And when you think about boundaries, that also means like take breaks where you can. It's hard to do, I know, on shift, but take them. If you're able to go outside, take a 5-minute walk outside. You know, if you can't like actually take a break, switch tasks. That can be something you can do. The evidence would say when you take a break, what you really need to do is like get up, get away from a screen, move around, and maybe talk to someone. Another really quick tip is like automate as much as you can. When we have to think about a lot of things, that's really stressful. So like even thinking about your clothes and your food and all of that's too much for us. So like plan your meals, plan your outfits, whatever you have to do like on the weekend or something like that, or like before a run of shifts or a hard rotation or whatever, to just not be thinking about that can really make you feel better. Reducing your notifications. So I turned off like automatic updating on my like mail on my phone. I turned off the thing on the side of my computer that tells me I have emails. It's like made my life so much better because I don't get annoyed every 2 minutes when it pops up that like somebody needs me for something. It's not urgent. They do not need you. Like it's okay. They'll find you if they urgently need you, right? It's a boundary thing. And separate work and home as much as you can. Very hard to do a telehealth, right? And you guys might have to do that some for like urgent care type of things. So, you know, set up a place at home where it's your office. Fold it up if you don't actually have like a room for it, like put a barrier up and call it your office. And then at the end of the day, like close it down and leave your office. Go to work, you know, like physically like pretend to walk there, go on a walk in the morning and then go to work and then come back. You know, talk about with your partner, like things that you can talk about and things that you can't, so that there are things that you are not like stressing out about every time you come home that you're being asked about and that feel emotionally draining to keep having the same conversations over and over. Tip 4, social support and connection are protective factors, and being vulnerable leads to connection. So I'm a super big believer that at least having one person that you're telling the truth to about how hard and challenging these things are and what you're actually going through makes a big difference. I'm hopeful that if you do have a partner, that it's that person, because that's what a good relationship is. But if it's not that person, like I hope there's someone else that you feel comfortable talking to about that stuff, because it's really important that you're not just pretending that this is all okay and it's very easy all of the time, because it's not, right? This is a challenging thing. There will be great times, there will be hard times, there will be times you'll be angry, there will be times that you'll be sad. Everybody's like that all the time. We are not universally happy. That is not how things work, right? It's really important that you have an outlet for that. It's really important that you work social support into that. And like you also check on each other. I like this video because I like this account because I'm ridiculous. But basically, you should follow this account on Instagram or Twitter, but basically it's important that you not just like have somebody you're talking to, but you also check on your friends and you have a group that you're doing this with. I think that's one of the good things about residencies. You have a cohort, but you should have people that you're checking on. You could have a buddy that you're checking on, but don't do it in public. Don't give people solutions to everything. Just listen. It can be really helpful to be a person that people just feel like they can talk to. People don't like to come talk to people that try to solve everything for them all the time. So just be a person that people can come and talk to. And it can just make it so you guys have a tighter place where you can go and talk about these things openly, and it'll feel like a safer place for that. And the last tip is that heroes, I hate that word, that's why it's in quotes, need help too. So ask for it. Asking for help is a strength, it's not a weakness. What does it mean to ask for help? So we're in this horrible culture in medicine where we are so warped that we don't even know we need help when we need it. So we have like normalized bad in medicine, like not sleeping, not eating, like feeling sad all the time. So we can't even identify when we have a problem. So this study is one of my favorite studies because it basically says that, which is they gave 275 surgeons this well-being survey from Mayo, which is one of the ways that people measure wellness. And they had the bottom 30%. They asked them how they did relative to everyone else. And 71% of them were like, I'm at average or above average. And they were on the bottom 30%. Basically, that means we can't calibrate relative to our peers, but it also means that like, if you're there, you're looking next to you and you're like, well, I'm sleeping as well as that guy. And you're looking next to you and you're saying, I'm eating as much as that guy, which means the whole spectrum is off, right? We've normalized bad entirely. So we can't actually judge ourselves versus other people. So we don't know when we need help, and that's bad. So we need to learn to identify within ourselves when we don't feel good, where our mood is, have checks, understand our feelings, understand when we're not sleeping, and that's actually a bad thing, because just because our culture says not eating, not sleeping, and feeling sad is okay, and that's normal in medicine, does not mean you don't need help for it, right? We should get help whenever we need it. And also getting help makes you a better caregiver. So in psychiatry, we go by this like premise that understanding your own darkness makes you better at dealing with the darkness of other people, meaning if I understand why I'm reacting to your stuff, I'm better at dealing with your stuff, right? So that means I get myself better. And that's really important. And the only way I can do that is going to therapy. So it has its own benefits way outside of just your well-being. It makes you better at your job. So if you're going to listen to that part of it, that's another reason to go. And the other reason is this transition isn't just a big transition for you in learning. It's a big, big mental health transition. And we know that because the data says so. So it is ridiculous how bad this data is, right? So look at this like graph. So the median absolute increase in depressive symptoms from trainees is 15% within the year of starting residency. So basically, it doesn't matter what specialty you're in, where you are in across the country, but residency does that to you. You get depressed because of residency 15% more. That's horrible, right? So you know that now, so you can take care of it, right? And be aware of it and notice when you have signs and symptoms. And if you look at this other study, it goes from 3% at baseline to 27% of people being depressed. That's a huge number. And the one that really worries me is this suicidal ideation number, people expressing thoughts of suicide, right? In the first 3 months of intern year, it increases 370%. That's insane, right? That's dangerous too, right? If you're having suicidal thoughts and you did not have them before, you need help. You need to ask for help, and you don't need to just grin and bear that and say, this is a byproduct of residency. It should not be a byproduct of residency. We do not just make you suicidal in medicine. That's not okay. So if you take anything out of what I'm saying, It's that literally, if you feel sad, you should get help. If you notice that you're not yourself, you should get help, and you should ask friends for help. And talking about it and normalizing that within the culture of medicine is not a problem. It's actually the best thing we can and should do for medicine. And it is like the way we should change medicine moving forward.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gold, and thank you, Dr. Shen. We appreciate you guys joining us for this timely and informative presentation tonight. Really, the way that this came about is we were discussing as a board what the needs of students and early residents are going through this transition. We highlighted, we spend so much time focusing on how to invest in being good with patients. What are some of the ways that we can really focus on investing in ourselves? And the way that we identified, the things that we identified really came down to, we need to be able to invest in helping us to be more satisfied outside of seeing patients. And that came down to finances, wellness, and just feeling comfortable with where we're at. So first, we'll go ahead and take questions from the audience now. Please continue to put questions into the chat that we'll go through as they come up. And then we'll start with Dr. Shen. I'll ask you a question kind of right off the bat. A common question that I hear from students and early residents is, well, thinking about finances as a student, how much should you plan when you're trying to match into residency about the cost of living versus the income that you're going to get as a resident in that area?
That's a great question, and very pertinent because as many of you may know, where I'm right now in Northern California, Palo Alto specifically, I believe it is the highest cost of living in the entire country. And so if the residents can do okay here, I think they can do okay anywhere. But I think my answer to that would be that it depends. I think it depends on what your personal situation is. In general, I would like to advocate that, you go to the program that you have the best fit, that you feel puts you in the best position for success. Sometimes, people want to go to the programs because when they're done, they want to work and live in that area. And doing residency where you eventually want to settle it makes sense. And there's a lot of advantages for doing residency where in the area you want to settle, because just the contacts and networks, the area, potentially the network of people that you'll interact with. So that's certainly an important factor. So I personally will put the cost of living lower on the ranking, but again, it definitely depends, because for some people, if you got several kids and massive amount of debt that tough to defer, or the rates are so high and it's creating a very stressful situation, I can see how that definitely may come into play. But even at Stanford, where it is again the most expensive zip codes in the country, most programs will acknowledge that, and if they want to be competitive, they need to recognize that. And so at Stanford, there is a significant subsidy in terms of housing subsidies and for the residents, and additional kind of resources, as well as I would say a higher resident pay, just to recognize that it is more expensive to be here. So I think in general, if that's a factor, it's definitely understandable, but I would still say think long term and think where you want to end up. And those 3 to 4 years will seem very short when you're done and into your career and looking back.
Hey, that's a great answer. I appreciate it. It's a perfect segue as well. We've talked about investing with the long-term result that you want in mind. I'll go to you, Dr. Gold, next with a related question. For students that are trying to think of, well, how can I invest in myself now to sort of anticipate the challenges that come with residency? What are some of the ways that you encourage people that are looking into medicine to try and invest in themselves early?
Like their mental health?
Yes. Yeah.
I think it's really hard in some ways because your schedule is so irregular. I think that people will tell me when I say, hey, do X, Y, or Z, they'll say that's all well and good, but my schedule changes every week. So thanks, So that's why I said things like figure out coping skills, because if I said figure out like how to go to therapy, you would say, cool, I'd love to, but it doesn't work every month, right? So I was like, my therapist was pretty cool in residency and would just let me basically change the time I was going every week. And I would just write her and give her my schedule and change every week. And there are often therapists that kind of do that based on having a lot of residents as patients. And that can be helpful. But I think it's important to get that into a routine as something you do if you're open to it. And I would suggest it being something that you do as part of prevention, but that's part of it. But that's why I said things like coping skills, because you can do it whenever. And if you figure those out early, then when you feel like more overwhelmed, you don't feel like you're like digging down deep into things. One of the problems is people come pretty late when you're in crisis. Like I see, healthcare professionals in my clinic. And one of the reasons that slide of sort of like people not recognizing signs and symptoms is bad is like, if you come to a psychiatrist like late, like meds work poorly, right? Our meds are not great. They're slow, they take time. And if you come pretty sick, my ability to help you is not great, right? It takes time. And so if you come earlier, I'm better able to help you. So I think it's important to be able to better recognize like what's going on with you earlier, because people can also help you earlier, So all of that is why I said a lot of those things, and why I really think a lot of the early investment in like what works and trying to understand yourself is really important, because once you realize you're off, then you need help.
Yeah, you both have touched on that actually, and it's something that I have seen as a senior resident now that I've observed myself doing and seen others do it, and I think it's super important. So I'd ask both of you this question. We have a few more questions coming in the chat that we'll get to in just a second. But I think for both of these things, mental health and financial wellness, we tend to procrastinate those things. And specifically, we tend to think, well, this stage that I'm in is really hard, but the next stage is going to be better. So it'll be easier to do it then. I think we do that in undergrad, and then we do it in medical school, and then we do it in residency. So how do we sort of, we'll go to you first, Dr. Shen. How do we start early on chipping away at that and making some strides to make sure that we're not procrastinating for our financial health? And then we'll go to you, Dr. Gold. And how do we take steps early on to make sure that we're not procrastinating, chipping away at our mental health?
Yeah, so I would say the most important thing is just to participate in whatever degree you can do. I did my residency in Boston, which is, fairly expensive. But I just thought, I would just put $50, just $50 a week, that somehow I could find that amount. And this is again in the early 2000s. But you figure, $50 a week, and compounded, over 20 years, it adds up, and so whatever that number is, $25, 15, the point isn't really the amount, it's building that habit and just developing the foundation, because when you do start earning more income, you'll be much more comfortable, more facile, because interestingly, when you start putting in just even a little amount into the stock market, you'd be amazed how much you start to pay attention. You start to pay attention to, oh gosh, what's going on with the economy? I just read something, a headline, the Dow Jones crash, or what does that mean? And you just, start to be a little more engaged, and that's all you need. You just need to participate. And even if you just don't ever want to think about it, you can just set it and forget it. And that's okay too, but I think the fact that you are just actively participating in whatever capacity, and I think for most people that's doable. Obviously there's extreme situations where, perhaps even that $50 or whatever may not be possible, but but for the most part, I think it's reasonable to just try to participate to some degree. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we always think that things are going to keep getting better. And there are things that get better, but there are also things that just change, right? Like there are different stressors at different stages of our life, but there always are stressors. So like, is being an attending different than being a resident? Yes. Is it so much less stressful in different ways, but like, are you all of a sudden not going to have any stresses? No. So I do think that you have to go like, yes, I will probably have more control, which is important, right? Because more control does like lead to less burnout, but look at attendings ahead of you and you'll see people are burning out and things like that. So if you can go like, I don't want that, that's a good help, like I was always like, that guy looks sad and cranky and angry, and I don't want to grow up to be that. Like, I want to grow up to be like a good teacher, a good human, and a good person. And I don't want this to destroy me. And however I can do that would be great. So a lot of that is emotional wellness, right? Like, you can't survive this like just pretending that's not part of it, because otherwise this thing will like really destroy you, because you will lose the part of you that like wanted to be a doctor, that like values patients, that values these things that like brought you to medicine in the first place. Because when you're tired, when you're stressed, when people are mean to you, when people bully you, when whatever happens, like, because some of it probably happened in med school already, you don't like cling on the things that you love, and you forget that stuff. And so I think it's really important to go like, how do I stay there? And the way to stay there is to find those ways to be grounded in the hope and the positive and the things that you really like. And so that's how I would say you have to start it early, because you need to keep yourself.
Great, both great insights. So moving on, there's other questions coming in through the chat. Dr. Shen, I see you answered it partially, but I think you could explain in even more detail. It would be terrific. Neil Bafsar says, what are some financially smart things residents in areas with high cost of living can do early on? For example, New York City, obviously we have a lot of residents there. Renting an apartment for 4 years seems like burning money in a way. What would you say?
So I think, again, a great question, and, a lot of variables that go into it. But if I, try to kind of simplify it, I would say the whole kind of rent versus buy, and there are calculators online. In fact, you can just go Google rent versus buy, and there are apps. I mean, you just plug in whatever assumptions, and it'll spit out what is the better option depending on what assumptions you put in. But typically, I would say that if your time frame is short, and I'm not, a short meaning like, I say 3 to 5 years, it typically tips the scale to rent instead of buying. And again, not that applies 100% of the scenario. I guess like many things, it depends. But typically, and that's because when you factor in things like what do you think the appreciation of that real estate is going to be over 3 to 5 years, it's, unless there's a certain hot market that's just going up like crazy, the amount of capital you put into a house, the maintenance, insurance, I mean, there's a lot of additional costs. The argument is there's an opportunity cost. What if that money was sitting in market in the same at the same time? What return would you get from those capital allocated to the stock market? So, and so again, it's not a it definitely, you want to input different assumptions. And I also mentioned like your if you're planning on staying, if you're planning on staying there, then definitely makes a lot more sense because you have a longer time frame. Are you planning on renting it out afterwards? And also, what's your income? As a resident, your income is relatively low, so the tax implication on a lower income salary is not as much as if you had a higher income for which you want that tax break that comes with owning a house. And so those are kind of things that I would factor in, and that goes into, again, that rent versus buy calculator. But in general, I would say typically, if I had to lean one way or the other for residency, unless you're planning on living there, renting is okay.
Yeah, I would just say as well, I'm on the other end of this now, where so I'm married and we had 3 kids coming into residency. We specifically picked a place where we would do residency that we felt like would be a good place for us as a family financially, and then also a program that I felt like would really I'd thrive as far as mental health, and that has been the case in both ways. So we're looking to sell our house now because we changed plans and decided to move somewhere else for full-time employment, and we'll make a profit. And I've already seen this sort of trend where the incoming interns are contacting, current residents and saying, should I rent, should I buy? And right now, a lot of outgoing residents are selling at a profit. And I would just say that, like you talked about timing the market earlier, things can be very different in 3 years, and that if you want to take that on, it depends a lot on the area that you're matching to and considering buying. And then also there are different ways that you can mitigate that risk somewhat, like buying somewhere that might need a little bit of might need some TLC, which is what we did, which led to some other stressors. but ultimately it made it a safer investment for us, and that's worked out well. But like you mentioned, there's no guaranteed investment. You're assuming risk with doing that, and make sure that you do it with the long game in mind. Another follow-up question for you, Dr. Shen. Ruben asks, do you suggest consolidating federal loans?
Yeah, no, if you can consolidate, it's always great, depending on what your interest rate is. And one of the questions I get asked quite a bit is, should I pay off my loans or try to save and invest? And so I would say 6% is kind of roughly the cutoff. If your interest rates on your loans are around 6% or so, then that's the kind of the break-even point, where if it's above it, you probably want to pay off your loans. If it's below it, you might want to consider not being too aggressive on paying off the loans, pay the minimum so you can invest, because in the long run, again, the historical return is about 9-10%, and after taxes, that hits to be about 6%. And so consolidating, if you can consolidate to get a lower rate, that is definitely advisable. I tell people that, I still have student loans at 2.5% that I intentionally don't pay off, because at 2.5%, I'm getting a 10% return on investments. And so I don't want to pay off my 2.5%. And so, but if my interest rate was stuck at 6-7%, then it becomes a tougher choice. There was a question right before that about interest rates staying low and buying a house. Oh, sorry. I thought I saw a question about, will interest rates stay low?
Yeah, Miguel asks, interest rates are low and buying a house as a resident at the moment seems impossible. Do you predict interest rates going up sometime soon and home prices to come down sometime in the next 5 years?
Yeah, so the interest rates has been in the news a lot. I would say that right now, I think at least for the foreseeable future, interest rates are likely going to stay low. Economy is a little tenuous. Government's trying to keep the economy going, and so the interest rates are probably going to stay low for the foreseeable future. It doesn't mean it's going to be like 3-5 years, but at least for the next year or two, it's probably going to still be at that historical low. I mean, this is the lowest it's been, I don't know, in 20 years or plus. And so it's incredible. I mean, the rates are that low. The home prices, it's just so hard, just depends on the market. In general, with lower interest rates, it'll stimulate more home buying. But again, it's just so, real estate is just one of those things that's so market dependent. Like in Palo Alto, home prices have appreciated 100% over the last 5 years. Other places have appreciated maybe 5% or not, or less. And so it just totally depends on where you are.
Great. So another question that I have for you, Dr. Golden. You had said specifically, we don't know we need help. We've normalized bad. I think that's the case that I've seen I think I went to a terrific emergency medicine training program. I would not speak bad of it at all, but I see in the overall system of medicine training that we've normalized these stressors. So when you find yourself in a program that is a great program, but you still feel like, bad is the normal in medical training, what are some steps that you can do to try and change that where you're at?
How do you change your program's culture? You're funny.
In 5 minutes.
It depends on how good, if you see little spaces in, I think if it's this place has no room for budging, you're gonna have a hard time being the person who wants to try to budget. Because it's going to feel really hard to go up that battle. But I think my big belief is that it'll start with having more open and honest conversations in medicine. And it doesn't have to be these big things where people self-disclose, right? I do think we need that, sort of like celebrities. We need attendings, we need powerful people in medicine, like the head of the AAMC said, he used to have depression. We need people like that to be this is what it's like, I got help. We need celebrities, right? But we also need people to just say, on rounds, to the med student, to the intern, to the, this was hard. What was your day like? I didn't sleep last night. I'm fighting with my wife, whatever you want, just kind of normalizing the fact that this stuff is not easy, or hey, that was a challenging code. Do you want to talk about it? Things that sometimes you forget. I think especially as you progress in residency, I remember as a med student, seeing something for the first time, and nobody as the resident remembered that it was hard to see, and trying to remember those things is really important to you know, that once you progress through it, like it gets harder to like remember that those things are hard for people to see for the first time, and trying your best to like know that and process those with people, or at least check in with people, I think it makes a huge difference in the culture.
That's a great short question or a short answer to a really difficult question. I would just echo that as well. I think that in general, though we are in challenging circumstances, people really love to do the right thing. Part of the reason that everyone goes into medicine is that they want to do well and be a positive force for others. And though there are a lot of stressors involved with training and with running a hospital, I think that when you speak up, that you'll be surprised at how much support you're given, and how much of an effect that can have positively for others around you. So I think that's certainly in line with my more limited experience in comparison to your own. Dr. Shen, back to you. Neil Bavsar asked a great question. He says, I've heard other students talk about repay to help with loans. Not sure what it is, but wondering if you had an opinion on the matter. So this is, repay being, a federal program to assist with loan payments for federal loans. Do you want to just talk a little bit about kind of loan payment in general? I think a question tied to that would be, when should I start paying back my loans, and what are the ways to go about it? Which, again,
yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that specific program, but just loan programs in general, often they, or at least loan forgiveness program, they're often tied to you working in an underserved area. And so, there's a lot of paperwork you have to prove based on like payer mix, based on the demographics, that it meets that criteria. And so, because obviously they want to incentivize going to an underserved area. That's about what I know about some of the federal loan forgiveness. In terms of when to pay it, as I kind of mentioned, a rough proxy would be what the interest rate is. And that interest rate will kind of drive your prioritization. If it's over roughly 6%, then I would consider trying to pay off the loans. If it's less than that, you might consider, being more conservative or paying the minimum amount. Again, this is just a very kind of crude way to approach it to start with, and then you layer in some of your own personal situations. And then next question was what percent of intern salary goes to taxes? It's about 15 to 20% on the federal side. And depending on what state you live in, it could be as high as 10% of your income versus as low as 0. And so it just depends. But about 15 to 20%, I would say, at the end of the year, effectively, is what you will have paid out.
Great, yeah. On the repay, that's one that I can add a little bit to. So the repay is one of the federal programs that you can apply for your federal student loans through the Department of Education, and you can enter these loan repayment programs and have subsidies while your income is low. If you want more information on that, you can Google it and get information. It is one of the advantages of keeping your loans through the Department of Education rather than consolidating them with a private institution. There's pros and cons to that. Lots of good blogs about it. It's a great question that we could not cover everything on for today. I think the next question for you, Dr. Gold, this one's really, really good. Yasin Eltigani says, is there anything we can do to prepare a spouse/family for this transition? Which I think is a terrific question, having been through that with my wife.
I started to briefly answer it in the chat, but anything that I've read on, the spouse relationship during residency, especially, it really is an identity shift for you as the resident. Like, you shift in like your work roles. You can sometimes shift in your role in the relationship depending on what the balance was before. So often there's like a couple structure, and depending on how much work you were doing before, it can shift in the balance. So like, maybe you weren't the primary person who was working all of the time, and then all of a sudden you are, because school is very different than work, right? And how often you're out of the house. If the person's not in medicine, it's also quite complicated. So there were a lot of conversations around like how much different it is if the identities match, right? Like if you are both in medicine. But I think the major thing there is it requires like pretty open lines of communication and really understanding that people do not read minds. So I have this conversation all of the time with people in all different levels of everything, which is that people very much think that just because they have good relationships with people, that they understand everything they're going through and must know what they are feeling and expressing, with things like slamming doors, leaving rooms, and like walking away or not coming home on time and things like that. People do not know what that means. People do not know what short texts mean. People do not know what like not responding means. The best thing to do is openly communicate about everything. That includes feelings. That includes like what's been hard. That includes like telling them what was hard about your day or week so that they feel like connected, because otherwise you're really keeping a lot of that from them. And it's going to be pretty hard to explain why you're like short or angry, or you're not as present with if you have a family, you know? And I think you have to include them as much as possible, or it's not going to feel like you're getting anywhere. I think it's also important to do things like have date nights and get out of the house. It's important to do things outside of medicine together. It's important to take the vacation days you have away from the hospital and leave and do things. And that is not always then going to see more family. Like make sure that you are also planning things where you enjoy them and you get away and spend time together, because your life is very based on work, right? So make sure that you have things to look forward to. Make sure that you're, you know, enjoying being around each other as much as you can. It's going to be hard, and that is true, but you can also find ways to make it a little bit better.
Great. I think having been through this process, every single thing that you said resonated with me. Something that those are all things that we've been through about trying to focus on making sure we understand each other with communication, making sure that we take time to invest in each other and not let work pull me away more than we have to. We're a few minutes past the hour, so we have really time for just I would say one more question for both of you, and I would ask you both the same question. Considering all the stressors that we have with finances and all the stressors that we have with mental health, we'll go to you, Dr. Shen, first, and then you, Dr. Golden. Would you both do it again, go through residency and into medicine? And what is it that makes you say, yes, I would do it again?
Yeah, I actually would definitely say yes. You know, I had kind of a strange path where, you know, I went into management consulting before medical school. And then during medical school, I went to business school and had a position at an investment bank in mergers and acquisitions. And, you know, and so I had a chance to kind of see different careers that were definitely a lot more lucrative than medicine. But in the end, I really feel that I made the best choice for me in terms of medicine, you know, because, you know, it feels meaningful to me. And so I love, you know, I love taking care of patients. I love the, you know, things that you can do, at least in, you know, emergency medicine. Obviously I picked it because that's what I enjoy. But in looking at my colleagues, you know, that in the other fields that, you know, I left, I really feel like I made the right choice. You know, there's just, obviously this is a very quick answer, but the short of it is, yes, I loved the path I took, and emergency medicine in particular. Thank you.
A complicated question, friend. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, sometimes when I look back, I don't know that I picked medicine myself. Like I went into medicine because I liked science. I went into medicine because I came from a family where my dad was a doctor. I went into medicine because that's what you did. And sometimes when I look back, I don't know that initially I made the choices myself. You know, I took a year off, but I was applying the whole time, you know, like, you know, I was like, look at me, I'm off and I'm working, and, you know, but it wasn't like I really reflected Anytime I asked, to drop out, my family was like, oh, you're fine, just stay, right? So, I mean, I think that a lot of times when I look back, I'm like, how much of this decision was me and how much of the decision was someone else's? And when I look at psychiatry, I know I made that decision myself. And I know that everything that I've done moving forward has been my decision. And everything that I do in my career and everything I do day to day now, and everything I do with like writing and advocacy and everything I've done shaping my career moving forward has been me. So I think it's an interesting question for me, which is like, if I went back and did it, what would I do? I don't know, but I know that like where I'm at is where I'm supposed to be, which is that if I'm put in this field to change this field, because maybe I wasn't expected to be in this field, because I'm a little bit of a rare apple for it, because I got a lot of feelings and I don't exactly fit. And I do a lot of things that are not typical for medicine. I write, I advocate, I don't like basic science, God forbid. I spend a lot of time talking to the media who are like the devil. I think that I'm happy to change this field for the better. And so I think looking back, like maybe I wouldn't have picked it, but it's a good field that needs to be changed and has wonderful people in it and does great things for people. I love being able to give back by actually seeing healthcare professionals as patients. I feel like it's an honor to have that ability. And so I think in a lot of ways it's a complicated answer, but it's kind of both coins for me.
I think we could certainly agree that we're really lucky in medicine to have you both, and really appreciate you spending your time sharing your expertise with us tonight and your insights. Thank you again to our panelists for their insights into finances and emotional wellness. To the audience, thank you again for joining us tonight. We hope to see you on our March 30th webinar, the second in this two-part series, Tricks of the Trade, Clinically Transitioning from Medical School to Residency. Stay safe and have a good night.